The tattoo on her shoulder blade told a story that would destroy careers, shatter reputations, and expose a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of military command. But first, they had to stop laughing at her dot, the Desert Eagle shooting. Range in Nevada echoed with the sharp crack of gunfire and the cruel laughter of 3 off-duty Marines. It was a humid Tuesday afternoon in June 2019, and Sarah Mitchell had made the mistake of walking into what they considered their territory. "Look at this wannabe," Sergeant Jake Morrison sneered, watching the petite blonde woman in faded jeans and a tank top approach the firing lane next to theirs. Probably never held anything bigger than a makeup brush. His companions, Corporals Danny Reeves and Marcus Webb, joined in the mockery. They'd been drinking since noon, celebrating Morrison's recent promotion, and their judgment had long since abandoned them. Sarah said nothing as she methodically unpacked her gear from a worn leather case. Her movements were precise, economical, the kind of efficiency that comes from years of repetition. But the Marines were too busy performing for each other to notice. "Hey, sweetheart," Webb called out, his words slurring slightly. "You sure you're in the right place? The nail salon is across town." Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she continued her preparation. She'd heard it all before. The assumptions, the condescension, the casual dismissal of her capabilities. What they didn't know was that Sarah Mitchell wasn't just any civilian. She was a former Army intelligence officer with 2 tours in Afghanistan, a recipient of the Bronze Star, and most importantly, she was the key witness in a case that would soon rock the military establishment to its core. The range master, Tom Bradley, watched the scene unfold with growing unease. He'd seen Sarah shoot before, had watched her put rounds through the same hole at distances. That would make seasoned marksmen weep, but these Marines were customers too, and business was business. Morrison stepped closer to Sarah's lane, emboldened by alcohol and the presence of his subordinates. "You know what? I bet you $20 you can't hit the broadside of a barn. Hell, I'll make it interesting. If you can outshoot me, I'll pay for your range time for a month." Sarah finally looked up, her green eyes cold as winter steel. "And if you lose, sweetheart, that's not happening." What happened next would be replayed in courtrooms, congressional hearings, and military tribunals for months to come. Sarah loaded her weapon, a customized M191 that had been her sidearm during her military service, and took her stance. The laughter died as her first shot punched through the 10 ring at 50 yards. The second followed, then the third, each round finding its mark with mechanical precision. But it was when she reached for a fresh magazine that everything changed. As she raised her arm, her tank top shifted, revealing the edge of a tattoo on her shoulder blade. Commander David Torres, who had been observing from the range office, dropped his coffee cup. It shattered on the concrete floor, the sound somehow audible even over the ambient noise of the shooting range. The tattoo was a uni insignia, one that Torres knew intimately because he'd been there when it was earned. The distinctive eagle and trident of SEAL Team 6, surrounded by dates and coordinates that made his blood run cold. But that was impossible. Sarah Mitchell wasn't supposed to exist anymore. Torres had been enjoying a quiet afternoon reviewing security protocols for the base when he decided to check on the civilian shooting range. As the commanding officer of the nearby Naval Special Warfare Unit, he maintained relationships with local businesses that served military personnel. It was routine, boring even, until he saw the tattoo. The memories came flooding back. Operation Blackwater, the classified mission in Syria that had gone catastrophically wrong. The cover-up that followed, and at the center of it all, a female intelligence operative who had supposedly died in a helicopter crash 3 years ago. Sarah finished her magazine, each shot grouped within a 2-inch circle. The Marines stood in stunned silence. Their earlier bravado evaporated. She began packing her gear with the same methodical precision she'd used to unpack it. "Nice shooting," Torres said, approaching carefully. His voice was steady, but his hands shook slightly as he extended them. "I'm Commander Torres. I don't believe we've met." Sarah's eyes met his, and in that moment, both of them knew that the careful house of cards they'd built around Operation Blackwater was about to come crashing down. "No," she said quietly, shouldering her case. "We haven't. But they had, 3 years ago, in a briefing room in Kandahar, where Sarah had presented evidence of war crimes that someone had been very eager to bury. Someone who had arranged for her to be on a helicopter that was supposed to crash with no survivors. Someone who thought the only witness to their crimes was dead Dot as Sarah walked toward the exit. Torres reached for his phone. His first call would be to his superior. His second would be to a lawyer, because tomorrow morning, Sarah Mitchell was going to do something that would change everything. She was going to file a federal lawsuit that would expose not just the cover-up of Operation Blackwater, but the conspiracy to murder her that reached to the highest levels of military command. The game was about to begin, and this time, Sarah held all the cards. The law offices of Patterson, Hughes and Associates buzzed with activity as Sarah Mitchell sat across from her attorney, James Patterson, spreading classified documents across the mahogany conference table. It had been 12 hours since her encounter at the shooting range, and the phone hadn't stopped ringing. "They're scared," Patterson said, reviewing the preliminary injunction that had been filed against Sarah just 2 hours earlier. "A federal gag order. They're pulling out all the stops." Sarah's hands were steady as she organized the evidence she'd spent 3 years collecting. Photos, audio recordings, financial records, all carefully hidden and documented while she lived under an assumed identity. In a small Nevada town, the woman the military thought was dead had been very much alive and very busy. The helicopter crash was supposed to solve all their problems, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. For dead intelligence operatives, all the witnesses to Operation Blackwater eliminated, except I wasn't on that helicopter. Patterson leaned forward. At 63, he'd seen every kind of case the military-industrial complex could throw at him. But this was different. The evidence Sarah had collected wasn't just damning, it was explosive. "Walk me through it again," he said. From the beginning. Sarah closed her eyes, and for a moment, she was back in Syria, watching through night vision scopes as a classified operation spiraled into atrocity. Operation Blackwater was supposed to be a surgical strike against a high-value target. Intelligence suggested the terrorist cell was operating from a compound outside Damascus. But when we got there, her voice trailed off. Even 3 years later, the memory was vivid. Children's screams, innocent civilians cut down by automatic weapons fire, and standing over the carnage, coordinating the massacre, was Colonel Richard Hawthorne, now General Hawthorne. Thanks to his heroic actions in Syria, I documented everything. Sarah continued. Photos, video, coordinates, 17 civilians killed, including 6 children, and when I tried to report it through proper channels, they buried it. Patterson finished and arranged for you to disappear. The door to the conference room burst open, and Patterson's assistant rushed in. Her face pale. "Mr. Patterson, there are federal marshals downstairs. They have a warrant." Sarah didn't flinch. She'd been expecting this. "How long do we have?" "Maybe 5 minutes." Patterson was already moving. scooping documents into a secure briefcase. The safe room, he told Sarah. Now, but as they moved toward the hidden door behind the bookshelf, Sarah pulled out her phone. There's something you need to see first. The video quality was grainy, security footage from the base in Syria, recorded 3 years ago. But the audio was crystal clear. 2 voices caught in conversation outside the command tent. The intelligence officer knows too much. The first voice said, "It belonged to Colonel Hawthorne. She's documented everything. What do you want me to do about it?" The second voice was Commander Torres. "Take care of it. Make it look like an accident. The helicopter manifest shows for passengers. Make sure there are for bodies in the wreckage." Patterson's face went white. Torres was in on it from the beginning. "It gets worse," Sarah said, fast-forwarding through the recording. "Listen to this." Hawthorne's voice again. "The Secretary of Defense is asking questions. Too many questions. We need this to go away permanently. Consider it done." Torres replied, "The Mitchell problem will be solved within 48 hours. The sound of footsteps in the hallway interrupted them, heavy boots, moving with military precision. Sarah grabbed the phone and the briefcase, the safe room. Now, as they sealed themselves behind the hidden door, Sarah's mind raced through the implications. The conspiracy wasn't just military, it reached into the highest levels of the Pentagon. The Secretary of Defense himself had been asking questions about Operation Blackwater, and Hawthorne had taken that as authorization to eliminate witnesses. But Sarah had survived, and more importantly, she'd been recording everything from the safe room. They could hear the marshal searching the office, furniture being moved, drawers open, computer seized. Patterson's assistant was answering questions with practiced innocence, but they both knew it was only a matter of time. "There's more," Sarah whispered, pulling out a second phone. "I've been in contact with 3 other survivors from Syria, soldiers who were there, who saw what really happened. They've been too scared to come forward, but if this case goes public..." Patterson studied the names on the screen. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, Corporal Kim, and Private First Class Johnson, all still on active duty. All potential witnesses to the massacre. They'll testify. Rodriguez will. He's been carrying the guilt for 3 years. Kim might, if we can, guarantee protection. Johnson, Sarah shook her head. Johnson tried to report what happened through official channels. He ended up with a psych discharge and an accidental overdose that wasn't so accidental. The implications hit Patterson like a physical blow. This wasn't just about covering up a war crime, it was about a systematic elimination of witnesses. That had been going on for 3 years. "How many others?" he asked. "7 that I know of. All road accidents or suicides, all connected to Operation Blackwater." The sounds from the outer office had stopped. Either the marshals had finished their search, or they were waiting. Sarah pulled out a tablet, showing Patterson a complex flowchart. "I mapped the entire conspiracy," she said. Hawthorne was the field commander, but he was taking orders from someone higher up. The money trail leads to a defense contractor, Aegis Security Systems. They had $1 billion contract riding on the operation's success. Patterson studied the documents, bank transfers, encrypted communications, meeting schedules. Sarah had built an airtight case against not just the military officers involved, but the civilian contractors who had profited from the cover-up. "This is why they want you dead," he realized. "You're not just a witness. You're the key to unraveling the entire network." Sarah nodded grimly. "And tomorrow, we're going to court. The preliminary hearing starts at 9 a.m., and they can't stop. The evidence is already in the hands of 3 different judges, the FBI, and a journalist. Insurance, Patterson said with approval. Insurance, Sarah confirmed, because this time, I'm not getting on any helicopters. As they prepared to emerge from the safe room, Sarah's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. Her face went pale as she read it. What is it? Patterson asked. Rodriguez, she said quietly. He's dead. Car accident. 2 hours ago. The message that followed was even worse. It was from Kim. They know. They're coming. Trust no one. Sarah looked at Patterson, and for the first time since walking into the shooting range, she looked afraid, not for herself, but for the remaining witnesses whose lives now hung in the balance. We're not just fighting for justice anymore, she said. We're fighting for survival. The federal courthouse in Las Vegas has seen its share of high-profile cases, but nothing quite like United States v. Mitchell. By 8 a.m., the steps were crowded with reporters, protesters, and military personnel in dress uniforms. Inside courtroom 7, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Judge Catherine Morrison, no relation to the Marine from the shooting range, had been specifically chosen for her experience. With classified material cases at 58, she presided over terrorism trials, espionage cases, and military tribunals. But as she reviewed the preliminary evidence that morning, even she seemed shaken by the scope of the allegations. Sarah sat at the plaintiff's table with James Patterson, her posture military straight despite the dark circles under her eyes. She hadn't slept since learning of Rodriguez's death, and 2 more potential witnesses had gone silent overnight. The conspiracy was moving fast to eliminate loose ends at the defense table. A team of 6 military lawyers flanked General Hawthorne and Commander Torres. The lead attorney, Colonel Jana Hayes, was the Pentagon's top legal mind, brilliant, ruthless, and completely committed to protecting the military's interests at any cost. Your Honor, Hayes began as the hearing commenced. We move for immediate dismissal of all charges. The plaintiff is operating under a false identity. Having been legally declared dead 3 years ago, she has no standing to bring this case. Patterson rose smoothly. Your Honor, we have documentary evidence that my client's death was staged as part of the conspiracy. We're here to expose. The defendant's own communications prove they believe she was alive and actively hunted. Judge Morrison studied the preliminary evidence folders. I'll hear arguments on the standing issue first. Colonel Hayes. Hayes approached the bench with confidence. Your Honor, Sarah Mitchell died in a helicopter crash in Syria on June 15, 2019. There's a death certificate, military records, even a grave in Arlington National Cemetery. The woman sitting at that table is either an imposter or someone who's committed federal fraud by assuming a dead person's identity. But Patterson was ready. Your Honor, I'd like to present Defense Exhibit A on the courtroom screens. Grainy. Security footage began to play. The timestamp showed June 13th, 2019, 2 days before the supposed helicopter crash. The video showed Sarah in a base commander's office, clearly alive and arguing with Colonel Hawthorne. Turn it up, Patterson said. Sarah's voice filled the courtroom. I have documented evidence of war crimes, Colonel. 17 civilians died because of your orders. I'm filing a formal report with the Inspector General. Hawthorne's response was chilling. Sergeant Mitchell, I think you need to reconsider your position. Accidents happen to soldiers who don't understand the bigger picture. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Hayes objected immediately. Your Honor, this footage is classified and was obtained illegally. Overruled, Judge Morrison said sharply. Continue, Mr. Patterson. Patterson clicked to the next exhibit. Your Honor, this is the helicopter manifest for the flight that supposedly killed my client. For names, Mitchell, Johnson, Williams, and Chen, all intelligence operatives who had knowledge of Operation Blackwater. He paused for effect. Here's the interesting part. My client was ordered to be on that helicopter at the last minute. Her original assignment that day was a desk rotation. Someone specifically wanted her on that flight. The courtroom fell silent. As the implications sank in, Hayes conferred quickly with her team, then stood. Your Honor, even if we accept the plaintiff's version of events, this court lacks jurisdiction. These were military operations conducted overseas under classified authority, but Judge Morrison was studying another document. Colonel Hayes, I'm looking at a communication from the Secretary of Defense dated June 10, 2019. It specifically orders a halt to Operation Blackwater pending investigation. Yet the massacre occurred on June 14th. How do you explain that? Hayes' confidence wavered. Your Honor, I'm not familiar with that particular document. I am, a voice said from the back of the courtroom. Every head turned as Secretary of Defense Robert Chen walked down the aisle. At 65, Chen commanded respect from both parties, and his unexpected appearance sent shockwaves through the room. Judge Morrison looked surprised. Mr. Secretary, this is highly irregular. Your Honor, I believe this court needs to hear the truth about Operation Blackwater. With your permission, I'd like to testify. Hayes jumped up. Objection, this is completely unprecedented. Overruled. Judge Morrison said firmly, I'll hear what the Secretary has to say. Chen took the witness stand with the gravity of a man carrying an enormous burden. Your Honor, 3 years ago, I received intelligence that suggested Operation Blackwater had resulted in civilian casualties. I immediately ordered a halt to the operation and launched an internal investigation. He paused, looking directly at Hawthorne. What I discovered was that my orders were ignored. Not only did the operation continue, but evidence was systematically destroyed and witnesses were eliminated. The courtroom erupted. Hayes demanded a recess, but Judge Morrison gavelled for order. Chen continued, I have been conducting my own investigation for 3 years, working with the FBI and military intelligence. What we found was a conspiracy that reaches into defense, contracting, military command, and potentially other government agencies. Patterson stood. Mr. Secretary, did you have any knowledge of attempts on my client's life? I did. In fact, it was my people who warned her about the helicopter. We arranged for her extraction and helped establish her new identity while we built our case. Sarah stared at Chen in shock. For 3 years, she believed she was alone, that she'd survived by luck and cunning, but she'd been protected, watched over by the very system she thought had betrayed her. Hayes was on her feet. Again, Your Honor, this is clearly a setup. The Secretary and the plaintiff had been colluding to frame my clients, but Chen wasn't finished. Colonel Hayes, your clients weren't just covering up war crimes. They were being paid to do it. He nodded to an FBI agent in the gallery who began distributing documents. These are bank records showing payments from Aegis security systems to offshore accounts, controlled by General Hawthorne and Commander Torres, $2 million each, paid in installments over 3 years. The defense table erupted in whispered conferences. Hawthorne's face had gone pale, while Torres stared straight ahead as if in shock. Patterson seized the moment. Your Honor, we have one more piece of evidence. Audio recordings from General Hawthorne's personal communications obtained through a federal wiretap authorized by the FISA court. The recordings that followed were devastating. Hawthorne coordinated with Aegis executives. discussing the elimination of witnesses, planning the cover-up. But the most damning was a conversation from just 2 days earlier. The Mitchell situation is out of control. Hawthorne's voice crackled through the courtroom speakers. We need to activate the final solution. What do you mean? Torres's voice replied, the courtroom. If she testifies, we're all finished. It has to look like an accident. Judge Morrison's face was stone as she turned to Hayes. Colonel, do you have any response to these allegations? Hayes stood slowly, and for the first time, she looked uncertain. Your Honor, we request a recess to confer with our clients. But before Judge Morrison could respond, Torres suddenly stood up at the defense table. Your Honor, I'd like to make a statement. Hayes grabbed his arm. Commander, I strongly advise against. Torres shook her off. I can't do this anymore. His voice carried clearly through the silent courtroom. Everything they've said is true. The massacre, the cover-up, the attempts on Sergeant Mitchell's life. All of it. Hawthorne turned to him with murder in his eyes, but Torres continued, I have recordings of my own. Your Honor, 3 years' worth of conversations with General Hawthorne and Aegis executives. I've been wearing a wire for the FBI for 18 months. The courtroom exploded into chaos as the full scope of the conspiracy finally became clear. Sarah sat in stunned silence, realizing that the man she believed was her enemy had been working to bring down the same system that had betrayed. Then both died as bailiffs moved to arrest Hawthorne. Judge Morrison gavelled for order. This court will recess until tomorrow morning. Mr. Patterson, prepare your final arguments. Colonel Hayes, I suggest you prepare plea recommendations for your clients. As the courtroom cleared, Sarah finally understood that she wasn't just fighting for justice. She was at the center of the largest military conspiracy in decades, and tomorrow, it would all come to an end. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps, as protesters and supporters gathered for the final day of what media had dubbed the Syria Papers trial inside Courtroom 7. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation as Judge Morrison prepared to deliver her ruling on one of the most significant military conspiracy cases in American history. Sarah Mitchell sat beside James Patterson, her hands folded calmly in her lap despite the magnitude of the moment. Across the aisle, General Hawthorne sat alone. Commander Torres had been moved to the Witness Protection Program after his bombshell confession, and his testimony had provided the final pieces of the conspiracy puzzle. Before I deliver my ruling, Judge Morrison began, I want to address the scope of what this court has uncovered. This case began as a civil rights lawsuit filed by a woman who was supposed to be dead. It has evolved into an expose of systematic corruption that reaches the highest levels of our military and defense establishment. She turned to face Hawthorne directly. General, you have been found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, war crimes, and treason. The evidence against you is overwhelming and damning. Hawthorne's face remained impassive, but his hands trembled slightly as the judge continued. However, Morrison said, this court has also uncovered evidence of an even larger conspiracy. Mr. Patterson approached the bench. As Patterson walked forward, FBI Director Sarah Chan entered the courtroom with a team of federal agents. The timing was clearly coordinated, and Sarah Mitchell felt a chill of apprehension. Your Honor, Director Chan announced, we have new evidence that significantly expands this case. Judge Morrison nodded. Proceed. Director Chan activated a large screen at the front of the courtroom. 6 hours ago, Commander Torres provided us with the contents of a safety deposit box he maintained in Switzerland. What we found changes everything. The screen displayed a complex organizational chart showing connections between military officials, defense contractors, intelligence agencies, and political figures. At the center was Aegis Security Systems, but the web extended far beyond what anyone had imagined. Operation Blackwater wasn't an isolated incident. Director Chen explained. It was part of a systematic program called Project Nightfall, a conspiracy to manufacture conflicts that would generate billions in defense contracts. Sarah stared at the screen in horror. The implications were staggering. You're saying the massacre was intentional, that they killed those civilians deliberately, not just in Syria? Chen replied grimly, we've identified similar incidents in Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, and Libya, all connected to Aegis Security Systems, all covered up by the same network. Patterson stood slowly. Your Honor, my client was never just a witness to a war crime. She stumbled onto the largest defense contractor conspiracy in history, but Judge Morrison was studying another document. Director Chen, I'm looking at a communication here that suggests knowledge of this conspiracy extended to the Senate Defense Committee. Is that correct? The courtroom fell silent. Chen nodded gravely. Your Honor, we have evidence that certain members of Congress were briefed on Project Nightfall and chose to look the other way in exchange for campaign contributions and defense contracts in their districts. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. This wasn't just a military conspiracy. It was a complete corruption of the democratic process, using manufactured conflicts to generate profit, while American soldiers and foreign civilians died. Hawthorne suddenly stood up. Your Honor, I demand immunity in exchange for full cooperation. His new attorney, his original team had withdrawn that morning, tried to silence him, but Hawthorne continued. I have names, dates, financial records. The people behind Project Nightfall go to the very top of our government. Judge Morrison leaned forward. General, are you saying there are officials in the current administration involved in this conspiracy? Before Hawthorne could answer, Sarah's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. Her face went white as she read it. Your Honor, she interrupted, standing abruptly. I need to speak with Director Chen immediately. The message was from one of her remaining contacts in intelligence. Chen is compromised. Project Nightfall cleanup operation authorized. Get out now. Sarah showed the message to Patterson, who immediately understood. The FBI director standing in the courtroom wasn't there to expand the investigation. She was there to contain it. Your Honor, Patterson said urgently, I request an immediate recess. My client's safety may be compromised. But Director Chen was already moving. Your Honor, that won't be necessary. Agent Martinez, take Ms. Mitchell into protective custody. The agents moved toward Sarah, but she was already backing toward the exit. Her military training kicked in as she assessed threats and escape routes. Sarah, Mitchell, Chen called out, you're under arrest for espionage, treason, and conspiracy against the United States government. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Judge Morrison gavelled for order, but Sarah was already moving. She'd recognized two of the FBI agents. They were Aegis security contractors she'd seen in Syria. Patterson grabbed her arm. Sarah, don't run. We can fight this legally. James, she said quietly, look at Agent Martinez's tattoo. Patterson glanced at the approaching agent and saw it, a small Aegis security logo on his wrist. The FBI had been compromised from the beginning. Sarah pulled out her phone and activated an app she'd hoped never to use. Within seconds, every major news network in the country received a data dump containing 3 years' worth of evidence about Project Nightfall, complete with Names, dates, financial records, and audio recordings. Your Honor, she called out as agents surrounded her. I just released everything to the press. Every document, every recording, every piece of evidence about Project Nightfall. It's over. Chen's face went pale. You just committed treason against your own country. No, Sarah replied calmly as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. I just saved it, as she was led from the courtroom. Judge Morrison made one final statement. This court will remain in session. I'm issuing warrants for the arrest of everyone connected to Project Nightfall, and I'm placing Director Chen under immediate investigation. But Sarah knew the real battle was just beginning. The evidence was now public, but the conspiracy had roots that went deeper than anyone imagined. As she was led to the federal holding facility, her phone, which somehow the agents had forgotten to confiscate, buzzed with one final message. It was from Secretary of Defense Chen. The President has been briefed. Project Nightfall is being shut down. You did it, Sarah, but stay alive. There are still people who want you dead. 6 months later, the trials that followed would result in the largest political scandal in American history. 17 members of Congress would resign. The defense industry would be completely restructured, and a new intelligence oversight committee would be established. But Sarah Mitchell, the woman who had been mocked at a shooting range for her appearance, had done something far more important than anyone realized. She hadn't just exposed a conspiracy. She'd proven that one person with the courage to stand up for truth could still change the world. The tattoo on her shoulder blade, the one that had started everything, bore a simple motto that had guided her through 3 years of hell. The only easy day was yesterday, as she sat in her safe house, preparing for the next phase of testimony that would complete the destruction of Project Nightfall. Sarah smiled. Tomorrow would be hard, but she'd survived the worst they could throw at her. And sometimes that's enough to change everything. If you're still here, I'd really like to know what this reminded you of or what you would have done in my place. And hey, if this story hit something in you and you want to support the channel, that little thanks button's always there. Thanks for hanging out. We're whole confessional stories, and this is just one of many unbelievable tales. Catch more by checking out the next video. We promise it's even wilder.